And so now I want to give you one more example to talk about public opinion polls and how they're properly interpreted, but I'm going to add something a little bit more in this example. So in this hypothetical poll, the question was, if the presidential election were held today, would you vote for candidate A or candidate B? And the results are as follows. 52% of the people polled say they would vote for candidate A. 48% say they would vote for candidate B. As with the other examples, the confidence level is 95%. And in this case, the margin of error is plus or minus 4%. Now, just so you know, that's not uncommon in terms of margins of error for public opinion polls. So, first I want you guys to calculate what the results are properly interpreted, because we know already that the media would report this as candidate A is ahead of candidate B by 4 percentage points. If nothing else, I hope that you've realized that that's just not true. That's not what this poll says, because there's a confidence level and there's a margin of error. So you can go ahead and just pause the video and figure out the calculations and then restart the video. I want to talk first about the results properly interpreted for candidate A, and then the results properly interpreted for candidate B. But always remember that you want to make sure to include the fact that we're 95% confident of a particular result. So with that in mind, either pause the video or I'm just going to continue on with the results. So I'll give you a second just in case you need a moment to pause the video. Okay, so properly interpreted, what this poll tells us is that we're 95% confident that somewhere between 56% and 48% will vote for candidate A. Now, I hate to repeat myself. Actually, I don't. But how did I get those numbers? Well, the margin of error is plus or minus 4. So for the support for candidate A, I added 4 points. That's the 56. And then I subtracted 4 points, and that's the 48. Then, what about candidate B? What were the results for there? We're 95% confident that between 52% and 44% would vote for candidate B. Now, if you got different results than what I just reported, please go back and watch these videos again and make sure that you understand how I got them, because it's not going to be enough to just do the math. If you get a question about public opinion polls, I'm going to want to know that you know how you came up with those numbers. Okay, and then just to make sure, I'm going to type in the numbers so that you can double check them for sure. So there are the results, properly interpreted. We're 95% confident that between 56 and 48% would vote for candidate A. We're 95% confident that between 52% and 44% would vote for candidate B. So now here's my question. Based on that poll, do we know which candidate is ahead? Is candidate A ahead of candidate B? Is candidate B ahead of candidate A? Well, if you said, I don't know, then you're right. Because based on this poll, there's no way to make that determination. And let me show you why. These are the possible outcomes for candidates A and candidate B. Let me, there we go, just so you can see it right there. Right? The possible outcomes for candidate A were between 56%, right, and 48%. The possible results, the 95% at the 95% confidence level for candidate B was between 52% and 44%. But the thing is, we don't know, statistically speaking, whether it's 56% or 48%. We don't know whether for candidate A, we don't know if it's 52% or 44% for candidate B. And sometimes students will assume, well, most of the numbers are larger for candidate A, so they must be ahead. But that's just not true. We really statistically cannot determine whether the true value of the population for candidate A is 56, 55, 54, 53, 52, 51, 50, 49, or 48. They are all equally likely, and the same thing is true for candidate B. It's equally likely that it's 52%, 51, 50, 49, 48, 47, 46, 45, or 44. We just don't know. And so what does that tell us? Who's ahead? Well, that's what makes it really complicated. Check this out. Based on this poll, it could be that 56% of the population supports candidate A and 44% supports candidate B. In other words, the media would report that candidate A was ahead by 4 percentage points, when in fact candidate A could be, at least based on this poll, could be ahead by 12 percentage points. Here's another possibility. It could also be that when we're looking at the true value of the population, if we knew what that was, it could be that 52% supported candidate B and only 48% supported candidate A. In other words, whereas the media would report that candidate A was ahead by 4 percentage points, it could actually be that candidate B is ahead by 4 percentage points. And here's an important thing to keep in mind. It doesn't mean because the poll showed 52% supporting candidate A and 48% supporting candidate B, it doesn't matter that if the true value of the population is candidate B having 52% and candidate A having 48% support, because that's factored in to the confidence level and the margin of error. People would frequently say, see, the poll was wrong, but not if you really know what polls are saying. Remember, polls aren't measuring public opinion, they're estimating public opinion within a certain range. So what that means is that when an election is close, 52-48, 49, 51-49, oftentimes polls don't tell us anything. As a matter of fact, the closer the race is, probably the more useless the poll is, or at least any one poll. Now, what do we do when a race is really close? Well, rather than looking at any one poll, if you're trying to get an idea of the status of the race in a close contest, what you don't do is just look at one poll and say that's the truth, because we know with random sampling, there's a potential for error in every poll. So there are certain websites, what they do is they collect multiple polls, and they'll use the average of all of the polls to get an idea of who's ahead and who's behind. One of those websites is called realclearpolitics.com. One word, realclearpolitics.com. The other one is 538, just written out in words, 538.com. And what they do is they take the average of the most recent polls, and that's how they estimate who's ahead. That's a good way of doing it. Is it a perfect way? Absolutely not. There is no perfect way. But since we can't measure public opinion, we have to estimate it. So you can't rely on one poll, and you certainly can't rely on one poll because it gives you the result that you want. But relying on multiple polls is usually a really effective way of getting an idea of who's ahead and in a particular race. But it's simply a matter of fact that the closer the race is, the less reliable the polls are going to be, because there's going to be uncertainty in the polls. Also, the other thing to keep in mind is that if there's a last minute shift in public opinion, so let's say the day before or 2 days before the election, a large chunk of the population who either didn't have a preference suddenly does, or they had one preference and they shift, most of the time political polls, public opinion polls won't pick that up. And so there are a number of reasons why polls might be wrong, the way people talk about it. But if you know how public opinion polls work, if you know how to interpret them, you're going to be far less likely to be surprised by any outcome. And so there you go. Now you know how to properly interpret public opinion polls. And the other thing you should do is notice how often when they talk about public opinion polls, they'll show a result like the one on the screen. Candidate A has 52%, candidate B has 48%, and they'll say candidate A is ahead by 4 percentage points. Then if they do another poll and it flips, and now candidate B has 52% and candidate A has 48%, that's all within the margin of error. But oftentimes in the news media, they'll say like, candidate B is surging. Candidate B isn't surging. We really don't know what's going on. So that's why you should always rely on multiple polls to get an idea of who's ahead and who's behind. But always keeping in mind that polls don't measure public opinion, they estimate public opinion, and public opinion can change, especially as we get closer to the final days of an election.